James Harrison stands tall in his old service blazer, facing the bank's executive board. At 72, his hands might shake a little, but his eyes are clear and determined as he presents the documents proving his ownership stake in First Metropolitan Bank. The board members don't even try to hide their amusement. To them, he's just another confused old man making ridiculous claims. They mock him openly, their expensive suits and gold watches flashing as they gesture dismissively at his carefully preserved paperwork. But they don't see the black Rolls-Royce pulling up outside. They don't know about Marcus Harrison, James's son, who spent the last 20 years building a billion-dollar empire in complete silence. Will these arrogant executives learn that true wealth isn't measured by the price of their suits, but by the integrity in their hearts? Dawn crept through the faded curtains of James Harrison's modest ranch house, casting soft light across photographs of his military service that lined the hallway. The old alarm clock hadn't needed to ring. Decades of military discipline had trained his body to wake at precisely 5:30 a.m. He moved with deliberate purpose through his morning routine, each action a testament to the precision that had defined his life. In the bathroom mirror, he adjusted his tie with practiced fingers, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from his service blazer. The brass buttons caught the light, polished to a shine, just as they had been during his years of active duty. His reflection showed a man weathered by time, but unbowed by it. Silver hair neatly trimmed, posture parade ground perfect despite the arthritic complaints of his joints. The leather portfolio lay waiting on his kitchen table, its surface worn smooth by years of careful handling. Inside were the documents he'd preserved through 3 decades: bank statements, investment records, and the original certificates his father had passed down to him. Each page was protected in a clear sleeve, organized chronologically, telling the story of a family's dedication to building something lasting. James poured his coffee into the thermos, black, no sugar, and allowed himself a moment to look. Out over his small backyard, the rose bushes his late wife Margaret had planted still bloomed faithfully each spring, tended by his careful hands. She'd always believed in him, even during those lean years when he'd chosen to invest in the bank rather than upgrade their modest home. The phone rang, startling him from his reverie. His son Marcus's number lit up the display. "Dad, you sure about doing this today?" Marcus's voice carried a note of concern that James had grown familiar with since Margaret's passing. "Son, your mother and I raised you to stand up for what's right," James replied, his voice steady. "These bank executives, they think they can rewrite history because the old guard is gone. But I've got every document, every proof of our family's stake in First Metropolitan. I know, Dad. Just let me know if you need anything." James smiled at his son's concern. Marcus had done well for himself, had an office job somewhere in the city, though he rarely spoke about his work. Always was a private one, his boy. "I'll be fine. You focus on your own business. Love you, son." "Love you too, Dad." After hanging up, James opened the portfolio one last time. His fingers traced the embossed lettering of the oldest document, a certificate of ownership dating back to 1929, when his own father had helped save the bank during the Great Depression. Back then, First Metropolitan had been a community bank, one that understood the value of trust and personal relationships. Now it was all chrome and marble, run by men who measured worth in designer labels and luxury cars. He carefully closed the portfolio, securing its brass clasps. The morning sun had fully risen now, painting the sky in shades of promise. In the distance, the city's skyline rose above the tree line, glass towers catching the light like mirrors. Somewhere in those towers, a boardroom of executives was preparing for another day of moving money around computer screens, probably never giving a thought to the history their bank was built upon. James lifted his father's pocket watch from its cherished place on the mantel, its gold case still gleaming despite its age. Inside, the inscription read, "To my son, remember that wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the respect you earn and the good you do." He slipped it into his pocket, its weight familiar and reassuring against his hip. With one final adjustment of his tie, James Harrison picked up the leather portfolio. He'd spent 30 years serving his country with honor, and another 30 building his stake in the bank with integrity. If those young executives thought they could dismiss him as just another rambling old man, they were about to learn a lesson about respect that no business school could teach. 60 floors above the city, Marcus Harrison ended the call with his father and turned to face the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. The early morning sun glinted off the neighboring skyscrapers, creating a canyon of light and glass that stretched to the horizon. His reflection showed a man in his late 40s wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than his father's entire wardrobe. Yet his face carried the same determined set of jaw that James Harrison was known for. "Sarah, cancel my meetings for the morning," he spoke into the intercom, "and get me everything we have on First Metropolitan's board members." "Already done, sir," his executive assistant replied. "The files are in your secure folder. Would you like me to alert the legal team?" Marcus smiled. In 20 years, Sarah had never once needed to be told twice. "Not yet. Let's see how this plays out first." He opened his laptop, accessing a hidden folder labeled Project Legacy. Inside was the fruit of 2 decades of careful planning, a web of shell companies, strategic investments, and silent acquisitions that had turned him into one of the most powerful men in the financial world. None of it traceable back to the Harrison name. The financial empire he'd built stretched across continents, but its heart had always been here, circling First Metropolitan Bank like a patient predator. Marcus had watched for years as the bank's new leadership slowly corrupted everything his grandfather and father had built. He documented every violation, every instance of elder abuse, every corrupt deal, all while accumulating enough power to bring them to their knees. His father had no idea. To James Harrison, Marcus was still the boy who'd left home with a business degree and modest ambitions. The occasional gifts, a new roof for the house, premium health insurance, were explained away as the perks of a middle management position. It had hurt sometimes maintaining that fiction, but Marcus had learned patience from his father. A soft chime from his computer announced an incoming alert. The bank's security system, compromised years ago, showed his father entering the lobby. Marcus minimized the window and opened another, a real-time feed of his own corporation's stock. Price. 20 years of work had culminated in this moment. He pressed the intercom again. "Sarah, get the Rolls-Royce ready. And call Victor at the exchange. It's time to execute Protocol Winter." "Yes, sir. Should I inform Mrs. Harrison?" Marcus paused, thinking of his wife Helen, who'd supported his long game from the beginning. "No need. She knows what day it is." He stood, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the window. Below, the city was fully awake now, streams of people flowing through the streets like blood through veins. Somewhere down there, his father was walking into a trap set by arrogant men who thought their designer suits and MBAs made them untouchable. Opening his safe, Marcus removed a single documento, the original proof of his first company, started with money saved from his paper route as a teenager. He'd kept it all these years as a reminder of where he started. Today, it would serve a different purpose. His phone buzzed with another alert. The bank's security cameras showed his father entering the boardroom. Marcus took a deep breath, remembering his mother's words before she passed. "Take care of him, but let him stand tall on his own until he truly needs you." Today was that day. Marcus Harrison picked up his briefcase, containing enough documented evidence to destroy the bank's board 10 times over, and headed for the private elevator. As the doors closed, he allowed himself a small smile. The executives of First Metropolitan were about to learn a harsh lesson about judging a man by his blazer and about the true meaning of legacy. First Metropolitan Bank's original charter hung in a dark mahogany frame on the 3rd floor, largely ignored by the steady stream of employees rushing past. The yellow document told a story few of them knew, a tale of survival during America's darkest financial hour. In 1929, when banks across the country were collapsing like dominoes, William Harrison, James's father, had mortgaged everything he owned to keep First Metropolitan's doors open. The bank's archives, tucked away in a climate-controlled basement room, held the proof. Leather-bound ledgers documented how William Harrison had convinced local farmers and businessmen to keep their money in the bank, backing his promises with his own property as collateral. His handwritten notes filled the margins. Matthew's family, 3 generations of savings. Wilson widow, pension secure. Cooper farm, loan restructured. Each entry represented a family saved from ruin, a business preserved, a community kept. Intact, William Harrison hadn't just saved a bank, he'd saved an entire town's worth of dreams. The current board chairman, Richard Sterling, had discovered these records during his hostile takeover 15 years ago. He'd immediately ordered them sealed, along with the original ownership agreements that granted the Harrison family a permanent stake in the bank's governance. To Sterling and his cronies, such documents were inconvenient remnants of a bygone era. But Sterling hadn't found everything. Deep in the archives, behind a false panel known only to the Harrison family, lay the proof that would shatter his carefully constructed facade. James Harrison had added to his father's hidden records over the years, documenting every instance of the new management's corruption. Loan denials based on age and race. Predatory interest rates disguised as premium services. Community investment funds redirected to board members' pet projects. The bank's marble lobby still bore the words William Harrison had insisted be carved above the entrance: service, trust, community. But now those words were obscured by digital displays showing stock prices and investment products. The original tellers' windows, with their warm wood and brass fittings, had been replaced by sleek glass partitions and automated kiosks. Even the building itself told the story of this transformation. The original structure, a solid brick edifice that had weathered the Depression without a crack, was now entombed within a glass and steel tower. Like the bank's values, the old foundation remained, buried beneath layers of modern pretense. Few customers remembered how, during the 2008 financial crisis, James Harrison had quietly used his position on the board to prevent foreclosures on dozens of local homes. He'd worked weekends reviewing loan applications, finding ways to help families stay afloat. But that was before Sterling's coup, before the old board was pushed out through a combination of legal pressure and manufactured scandals. The bank's new mission statement, displayed on flat screens throughout the building, read, "Maximizing shareholder value through innovative financial solutions." Gone were the days when bankers knew their customers' names, when a handshake meant as much as a signature, when banking was about building communities rather than bonus packages. But the Harrison legacy hadn't died. It had gone dormant, like seeds waiting for spring. In his modest home office, James had kept copies of every document, every transaction, every proof of the bank's transformation from community pillar to profit machine. And unknown to Sterling, Marcus Harrison had spent years quietly buying shares through proxy companies, assembling the pieces needed to reclaim his family's legacy. The stage was set for a confrontation that would remind everyone that history may be hidden, but it cannot be erased. The proof was in the papers James carried in his leather portfolio, in the sealed records in the basement archives, and in the very foundations of the bank itself. First Metropolitan was about to rediscover its roots, whether its current leadership liked it or not. The security cameras tracked James Harrison's progress through the lobby, their digital eyes recording what would soon become historical footage. At the reception desk, a young woman in a crisp blazer barely glanced up from her screen. "I'm here to see the board," James said, standing straight despite the weight of his portfolio. "Do you have an appointment?" Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, already prepared to dismiss him. "No appointment needed. Harrison family business." He spoke with quiet authority, the same tone he'd used to command troops in combat. The receptionist's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched. "Sir, the board is in session. Without an appointment, check your records. Harrison, James Harrison." A few quick keystrokes, then a frown. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't see any call. Richard Sterling's office. Tell him James Harrison is here about his family's stake in First Metropolitan." Something in his voice made her hesitate. She lifted the phone, whispered a few words, then waited. Her eyes widened slightly at whatever response came through the earpiece. "Mr. Harrison, they'll see you. Jerry will escort you up." She gestured to a security guard who had materialized nearby. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent. Jerry kept stealing glances at James, probably wondering what an elderly man in an old service blazer could have to say to the board. The young guard couldn't know he was witnessing the beginning of a revolution. The boardroom doors opened onto a scene of calculated intimidation. 12 men and women in bespoke suits sat around a massive table of polished mahogany, their faces arranged in expressions of practiced condescension. At the head sat Richard Sterling, his silver hair styled to project authority, his Italian suit worth more than James's car. "Mr. Harrison," Sterling's voice dripped false warmth, "this is an unexpected pleasure, though I must say interrupting a board meeting is rather unconventional." James stepped forward, placing his portfolio on the table. "Unconventional? Like hiding ownership records? Like burying my family's stake in this bank?" A few board members exchanged glances. Sterling's smile didn't waver. "James, may I call you James? I fear there's been some misunderstanding. First Metropolitan's ownership structure is quite clear, all properly filed with the SEC. Is it?" James began removing documents from his portfolio. "Then explain these. Original ownership certificates, board minutes from 1929, proof of my father's role in saving this bank during the Depression." Sterling barely glanced at the papers. Ancient history. Whatever arrangements existed then were properly dissolved during our modernization 15 years ago. "Surely you remember signing the papers." "I signed nothing." James's voice was steel. "You forced out the old board through fraud. I have proof of that too." A younger board member leaned forward, smirking. "Mr. Harrison, banking has changed since your father's day. We're a modern institution now, not some small-town savings and loan." Laughter rippled around the table. Sterling raised a hand for quiet. "James, let's be reasonable. You're clearly confused about some old documents. Why don't we have someone from legal review them? Perhaps over lunch next week." Confused, James laid out more papers. "Like these records of predatory loans targeting seniors, or these documents showing diverted community investment funds." The laughter died. Sterling's smile turned cold. "Jerry, please escort Mr. Harrison out. He's clearly not well." "Not well?" James straightened to his full height. "I commanded troops in combat while you were still in diapers, Sterling. I've faced worse than a room full of overpaid bankers." "Remove him!" Sterling snapped, "and someone call security to collect these papers." As Jerry stepped forward, a commotion arose from the reception area. The boardroom doors swung open. Again, James didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He'd recognized the sound of those particular Italian leather shoes coming down the hall. The board members, however, were staring past him, their faces suddenly uncertain. Sterling half rose from his chair, his composure cracking for the first time. "I believe," said a familiar voice from the doorway, "that my father was in the middle of making a point. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Marcus Harrison stepped into the boardroom like he owned it, which, unbeknownst to everyone present except his father, he nearly did. His presence seemed to physically alter the room's atmosphere. Gone was the board's smug superiority, replaced by uncertain glances and subtle shifting in expensive chairs. "Marcus Harrison," he announced, though from the changing expressions around the table, several board members were already recognizing him from financial news headlines. "CEO of Harrison." Global Partners. He placed a sleek briefcase on the table next to his father's worn portfolio, old and new power side by side. Sterling recovered first, his practiced smile returning. "Mr. Harrison, this is quite a surprise. I had no idea." "That's rather the point, isn't it?" Marcus interrupted smoothly. He pulled out his phone, tapped once, and the boardroom's display screens flared to life. Charts and figures filled the screens, showing a complex web of corporate ownership. "While you were busy mocking my father, you failed to notice that Harrison Global Partners has become your largest shareholder." The young board member who had laughed earlier choked on his water. Another began frantically typing on her tablet, presumably verifying Marcus's claim. "Through a series of shell companies and strategic investments," Marcus continued, "we now control 37% of First Metropolitan's voting shares. Another 15% belongs to investors who, as of this morning, have pledged their proxy votes to us." Sterling's smile had vanished entirely. This is impossible. Our compliance team monitors all major share acquisitions." "Your compliance team?" Marcus's laugh was cold. "The same one that helped you bury evidence of predatory lending. The same one that helped disguise the misappropriation of community development funds." He opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Would you like to see the evidence? I've spent 20 years collecting it." James stood quietly beside his son, his weathered hands resting on his portfolio. The contrast between them was stark. Marcus in his $1,000 suit, James in his service blazer, but their eyes held the same steel. "You can't prove any of this," Sterling snapped, but his voice had lost its authority. Marcus pulled out his phone again. "Sarah, execute Protocol Winter." He turned to the board. "As we speak, evidence of your systematic corruption is being delivered to the SEC, the Federal Reserve, and 7 major financial news outlets. But that's not even the interesting part." He laid out more documents from his briefcase. "These are the original ownership documents my grandfather signed in 1929, the ones you thought you'd buried. Here's the thing about old documents. People tend to make copies. And my father," he smiled at James, "he made very good copies." The boardroom doors opened again as a team of lawyers entered, led by a sharp-featured woman carrying a tablet. "The injunction has been filed, Mr. Harrison, and the SEC has acknowledged receipt of our documentation." Sterling stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. You can't just walk in here and—" "Actually, we can," Marcus cut in. "You see, when my grandfather saved this bank, he included a provision in the charter. The Harrison family maintains perpetual right of oversight. You tried to bury that provision, but you couldn't legally remove it, which means every decision this board has made without Harrison family approval for the past 15 years is potentially invalid." The blood drained from Sterling's face as the implications sank in. Around the table, board members were already reaching for their phones, no doubt calling their personal lawyers. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. "This board will resign, effective immediately. You'll surrender all relevant documents to our audit team. In return, we'll consider not pursuing personal legal action against each of you." He turned to his father. "Unless you'd prefer to press charges, Dad. It's your call." James looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "The Harrison family has always believed in second chances. That's why my father saved this bank in the first place." He paused. "But second chances have to be earned." Marcus nodded, understanding perfectly. "You have 1 hour to decide," he told the board. "After that, everything goes public. Sarah," he spoke into his phone, "please send in the audit team and have legal start preparing individual indictments, just in case." As the audit team filed into the boardroom, James's hand unconsciously moved to the military medal pinned to his blazer. The familiar touch brought back memories of another time when he'd stood firm against overwhelming odds. Da Nang, 1971. The rain had been relentless, turning the jungle into a steam bath. His unit was pinned down, supplies running low. The enemy had expected them to retreat, to abandon their position protecting a small village. But James Harrison hadn't become a sergeant by giving up when things got tough. "We hold the line," he'd told his men. "These villagers are counting on us." For 3 days, they'd maintained their position. When reinforcements finally arrived, not a single villager had been lost. The medal came later, but it wasn't the recognition that mattered. It was the principle. You stand your ground when people depend on you. Margaret had understood that principle better than anyone. During his deployments, she'd managed their modest home and raised Marcus alone for months at a time. Every spare dollar went into their bank account at First Metropolitan, building their stake dollar by dollar. "Your father saved this bank," she'd remind him. "It's not just money, it's a legacy of doing what's right." The memory of her voice was so clear it made his chest ache. She'd been gone 5 years now, but her wisdom still guided him. On her last day, she'd made him promise to protect what his father had built. "The bank's changed," she'd said, her voice weak but determined. "They think money is all that matters now. Show them what real value means, James." Marcus had been there, too, holding his mother's other hand. James remembered how his son's shoulders had squared at her words, though at the time he hadn't understood the significance. Another memory surfaced. Marcus at 12, doing his paper route in the pre-dawn darkness. "Why do you get up so early?" "Son," James had asked. "Because you taught me that showing up matters, Dad. Being reliable matters." The same determination had shown in Marcus's eyes when he'd left for college on a partial scholarship. James and Margaret had scraped together the rest of the tuition, never suspecting their son would become one of the most successful businessmen in the country. The boardroom's tension brought James back to the present. The audit team was efficiently gathering documents while board members sat in stunned silence. Sterling's face had taken on the grey pallor of a man watching his empire crumble. James thought of his father, William Harrison, standing in this same building during the Depression. The old man had pledged everything he owned to keep the bank's doors open, not for profit, but because he believed a community was only as strong as its foundation. "A bank isn't just a building full of money," William had told him. "It's a storehouse of dreams. Every deposit is someone's hope for the future. Every loan is a chance for someone to build something lasting." That philosophy had guided James through 30 years of military service and another 30 of careful investment in First Metropolitan. While others chased quick profits, he'd stayed true to his father's vision of banking as a cornerstone of community. His hand moved from the medal to the worn leather of his portfolio. Inside were more than just documents proving ownership. They were records of a lifetime of choices. Every saved dollar, every careful investment, every board meeting he'd attended, before Sterling's takeover, had been a brick in the foundation his father built. Looking at Marcus now, commanding the room with quiet authority, James felt a profound sense of completion. His son had taken the lessons of duty, patience, and integrity and built something far beyond what James had imagined possible. But more importantly, he'd done it without losing sight of what truly mattered. The Harrison legacy wasn't about money or power. It was about standing firm when it would be easier to retreat, about protecting those who needed protection, about remembering that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the principles you uphold. The next 30 minutes transformed the boardroom into a theater of calculated corporate warfare. Marcus Harrison moved with the precision of a chess grandmaster, each action part of a strategy decades in the making. Financial Times alerts began, lighting up phones around the table as the first news breaks hit the wire. Breaking: Harrison Global Partners reveals controlling stake in First Metropolitan Bank. Market alert: First Metropolitan shares halted amid ownership dispute. Exclusive: Billionaire Marcus Harrison moves to reclaim family banking legacy. Sterling's phone buzzed continuously, but he'd stopped checking it. His face had taken on the waxy sheen of a man watching his world implode. The other board members maintained their physical positions, but had emotionally retreated, already calculating their personal exit strategies. "Sarah," Marcus spoke into his phone, "please begin phase 2. He turned to address the board. "In approximately 3 minutes, your personal banking information will be frozen pending investigation. I suggest you cooperate fully with our audit team if you'd like to maintain access to your assets." A female board member, Janet Chen, according to her nameplate, finally broke the silence. "This is corporate terrorism. You can't possibly have the authority to—" "Actually," Marcus interrupted, sliding a document across the table, "we do. This is a federal warrant authorizing the examination of all board members' financial records in connection with suspected securities fraud." He allowed himself a small smile. "The SEC has been quite interested in our evidence." James watched his son work, recognizing in Marcus's methodical precision the same attention to detail that had characterized his own military planning. Every contingency had been anticipated, every reaction calculated. The audit team moved with practiced efficiency, securing computers and collecting phones. Outside the boardroom windows, the morning sun illuminated the city skyline. The same view that had witnessed decades of corporate malfeasance was now bearing witness to its reckoning. Marcus's phone chimed. "Ah, right on schedule." He turned. On the boardroom's main screen, displaying a live news feed, the ticker showed First Metropolitan's stock price frozen after a sharp decline. "The market is responding exactly as predicted. When trading resumes, your shareholders will be demanding answers." Sterling finally found his voice. "You'll destroy the bank's value. Everything we've built, everything you've stolen," Marcus corrected. "And no, we won't destroy the bank's value. We're going to restore it, along with its original mission." He nodded to his father. "Would you like to explain that part, Dad?" James stepped forward, his service blazer a stark contrast to the expensive suit surrounding him. First Metropolitan was founded on the principle of community service. Every penny you diverted from small business loans, every predatory mortgage you approved, every elderly person you deceived, that ends today. The boardroom doors opened again as another team entered, young, professional, carrying tablets and laptops. Marcus made the introductions. "Meet your interim management team, Harvard MBAs, all of them. But more importantly, each one has spent the past year working in community banking, learning banking the way it should be done." One of the younger board members, clearly seeing which way the wind was blowing, sat up straighter. "Mr. Harrison, Marcus, perhaps we could discuss a role in the new organization." "I don't think so, Mr. Peterson." Marcus didn't even look at him. "Our forensic accountants found your signature on too many questionable transactions, though I'm sure the SEC will be very interested in discussing your future." The morning sun had climbed higher, its rays now directly illuminating the carved words above the boardroom door. Service, trust, community. For years, they had been merely decorative, a relic of the bank's past. Now they seemed to glow with renewed purpose. Marcus checked his watch. "The hour is almost up. I suggest those of you who haven't already done so contact your lawyers, though I should mention—" He paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. "We've already spoken to most of the major firms in the city. Conflicts of interest. You understand." The message was clear. Every escape route had been closed, every contingency planned for, every defense anticipated. The mighty had fallen, not with a bang, but with the quiet efficiency of justice long delayed but finally served. James stood by the window, his reflection overlaying the city beyond. In his weathered face was the satisfaction of seeing his father's legacy preserved, his wife's faith vindicated, and his son's true nature revealed. The Harrison family's long game was finally reaching its endgame. As the audit team escorted the last board member from the room, father and son found themselves alone in the vast boardroom. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the silver in James's hair and highlighting the tears that had begun to form in his eyes. 20 years, James said softly, turning to his son. All this time you were building this. He gestured at the evidence of Marcus's empire scattered across the mahogany table. Marcus loosened his tie slightly, and for a moment James saw the boy who used to sit at their kitchen table, doing homework by lamplight. I couldn't tell you, Dad, not until everything was in place. I needed them to underestimate us, to underestimate you. From his briefcase, Marcus pulled out a faded photograph, himself at 10 years old, sitting on the bank's front steps beside his father, both of them smiling. The same photograph hung in James's hallway at home. Remember what you told me that day? Marcus asked, holding up the photo. You said, son, a man's worth isn't in his wallet, it's in his word. He smiled softly. I built all of this on that principle. Every deal, every acquisition. I never forgot what you taught me. James picked up his old leather portfolio, running his fingers over its worn surface. Your mother knew, didn't she? At the end? Marcus nodded, his composure cracking slightly. I had to tell her. She was worried about leaving us, worried about the bank. When I explained what I was building, what I was planning, he paused, collecting himself. She smiled, Dad. That beautiful smile of hers. She said, that's my boys, the quiet ones, who move mountains. James sat heavily in one of the board's expensive chairs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what his son had accomplished. I've been fighting them with paperwork and principles, while you were outflanking them on every front. You taught me strategy, Dad. All those chess games, all those history books about great military campaigns. Marcus sat beside his father. I just applied it to the financial world. Every time they mocked you, every time they dismissed another complaint, they were just giving me more ammunition. From his pocket, James pulled out his father's old pocket watch. Your grandfather used to say that time reveals truth. That's why I waited, Marcus explained. I could have moved against them years ago, but it wouldn't have been complete. I needed them to show their true colors. He gestured to the paperwork spread across the table. All of this. Every corrupt deal, every betrayal of the bank's principles. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah, Marcus's executive assistant, entered quietly. Mr. Harrison, Marcus, the press is gathering in the lobby. They're requesting a statement. Marcus looked at his father. Would you like to do the honors, Dad? You're the one in uniform. James straightened his service blazer, touching the medal briefly. Together, son, the Harrison family united. He smiled. Your mother would have wanted it that way. As they stood to leave, Marcus paused by the old bank charter on the wall. You know what this means, don't you? Everything grandfather built, everything you protected, it's safe now. First Metropolitan can go back to being what it was meant to be. James nodded, understanding. A guardian of community dreams, not just profits. They walked to the door. Together, father and son, military discipline matching corporate power. But before they could leave, Marcus turned back one last time. Dad, thank you, not just for today, but for everything. For showing me that patience and principle matter more than quick profits. For teaching me that true power comes from serving others. He straightened his father's already perfect tie. Everything I built on your foundation. James pulled his son into a tight embrace, his medal pressing between them. In that moment, they weren't a billionaire CEO and a decorated veteran. They were simply father and son, united in completing a legacy 3 generations in the making. As they separated, both men wiped their eyes discreetly. James smiled. Your grandfather would be proud, son. Not of the money or the power, but of how you used it, of who you became. Together, they walked toward the elevator, ready to face the press and share their story with the world. The Harrison family's quiet strength had prevailed, proving that sometimes the most powerful moves in life are made not with fury and force, but with patience, principle, and unwavering devotion to what's right. As the audit team escorted the last board member from the room, father and son found themselves alone in the vast boardroom. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the silver in James's hair and highlighting the tears that had begun to form in his eyes. 20 years, James said softly, turning to his son. All this time you were building this. He gestured at the evidence of Marcus's empire scattered across the mahogany table. Marcus loosened his tie slightly, and for a moment James saw the boy who used to sit at their kitchen table doing homework by lamplight. I couldn't tell you, Dad, not until everything was in place. I needed them to underestimate us, to underestimate you. From his briefcase, Marcus pulled out a faded photograph, himself at 10 years old, sitting on the bank's front steps beside his father, both of them smiling. The same photograph hung in James's hallway at home. Remember what you told me that... "A day," Marcus asked, holding up the photo. "You said, son, a man's worth isn't in his wallet, it's in his word." He smiled softly. "I built all of this on that principle. Every deal, every acquisition. I never forgot what you taught me." James picked up his old leather portfolio, running his fingers over its worn surface. "Your mother knew, didn't she?" At the end, Marcus nodded, his composure cracking slightly. "I had to tell her. She was worried about leaving us, worried about the bank. When I explained what I was building, what I was planning..." He paused, collecting himself. She smiled, Dad. That beautiful smile of hers. She said, "That's my boys, the quiet ones, who move mountains." James sat heavily in one of the board's expensive chairs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what his son had accomplished. "I've been fighting them with paperwork and principles, while you were outflanking them on every front. You taught me strategy, Dad, all those chess games, all those history books about great military campaigns." Marcus sat beside his father. "I just applied it to the financial world. Every time they mocked you, every time they dismissed another complaint, they were just giving me more ammunition." From his pocket, James pulled out his father's old pocket watch. "Your grandfather used to say that time reveals truth. That's why I waited," Marcus explained. "I could have moved against them years ago, but it wouldn't have been complete. I needed them to show their true colors. I needed..." He gestured to the paperwork spread across the table. "All of this, every corrupt deal, every betrayal of the bank's principles." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah, Marcus's executive assistant, entered quietly. "Mr. Harrison, Marcus, the press is gathering in the lobby. They're requesting a statement." Marcus looked at his father. "Would you like to do the honors, Dad? You're the one in uniform." James straightened his service blazer, touching the medal briefly. "Together, son, the Harrison family united." He smiled. "Your mother would have wanted it that way." As they stood to leave, Marcus paused by the old bank charter on the wall. "You know what this means, don't you? Everything grandfather built, everything you protected, it's safe now. First Metropolitan can go back to being what it was meant to be." James nodded, understanding. "A guardian of community dreams, not just profits." They walked to the door. Together, father and son, military discipline matching corporate power. But before they could leave, Marcus turned back one last time. "Dad, thank you. Not just for today, but for everything. For showing me that patience and principle matter more than quick profits. For teaching me that true power comes from serving others." He straightened his father's already perfect tie. "Everything I built on your foundation." James pulled his son into a tight embrace, his medal pressing between them. In that moment, they weren't a billionaire CEO and a decorated veteran. They were simply father and son, united in completing a legacy 3 generations in the making. As they separated, both men wiped their eyes discreetly. James smiled. "Your grandfather would be proud, son. Not of the money or the power, but of how you used it, of who you became." Together, they walked toward the elevator, ready to face the press and share their story with the world. The Harrison family's quiet strength had prevailed, proving that sometimes the most powerful moves in life are made not with fury and force, but with patience, principle, and unwavering devotion to what's right. By mid-afternoon, the story had exploded across every major news network. Security footage of the board mocking James had gone viral, transformed into a powerful symbol of corporate arrogance confronting everyday dignity. The clip of the elderly veteran in his service blazer, standing tall as wealthy executives laughed at him, struck a chord that resonated far beyond the financial world. Breaking, billionaire son reveals secret empire built to save father's legacy. Veterans' vindication, how a decorated soldier exposed banking corruption. First Metropolitan scandal, elderly targeted in massive financial scheme. The bank's lobby had become a media circus. Television crews jostled for position while reporters delivered breathless updates. Social media was ablaze with reactions, the story touching something deep in the public consciousness. "This is Paula Chen for Financial Network News," one reporter. Broadcast live. "Behind me, a scene unprecedented in modern banking history is unfolding. James Harrison, a decorated veteran who for years tried to expose corruption at First Metropolitan, has been vindicated by his son, Marcus Harrison, revealed today as one of the nation's most successful silent billionaires." Inside Marcus's office, James watched the coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and discomfort at the attention. His son's phone hadn't stopped ringing, calls from other banks, regulators, investors, and media outlets, all demanding comments. "Dad," Marcus said, muting another incoming call, "they want us on Global Finance tonight, primetime interview." James shook his head. "You handle the media, son. I'm just a soldier who did what needed doing." "That's exactly why you need to speak," Marcus insisted. "People trust you. You're not some polished corporate figurehead. You're the real thing." Social media feeds scrolled across one of Marcus's monitors. The hashtags Jung Harrison Heroes and Jung Banking Justice were trending nationally. Videos were being shared of other elderly victims of bank fraud, inspired by James to tell their stories. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah entered with the tablet. "Sir, you need to see this. Other banks are starting internal reviews, trying to get ahead of similar scandals. The ripple effect is spreading across the financial sector." Marcus smiled. "Fear is a powerful motivator. Every bank in the country is wondering if they have their own Marcus Harrison quietly watching." The footage from the boardroom confrontation played again on a nearby screen. But now, viewers could see what the board hadn't known that morning, the quiet power behind James's confidence, the justice about to unfold. "Look at this," Sarah pointed to her tablet. Former employees of First Metropolitan were coming forward on social media, sharing their own stories of being fired or forced out for questioning unethical practices. Each post added another piece to the picture of corruption. James stood by the window, watching the media vans below. "Your mother would have loved this," he said quietly. "She always said sunlight was the best disinfectant." "Mr. Harrison," Sarah interrupted gently, "the veterans groups are organizing. They're calling for a complete audit of all major banks, lending practices to service members and their families." The story had transcended a simple banking scandal. It had become a symbol of generational justice, of dignity standing against greed, of patience and principle triumphing over quick profit. Marcus joined his father at the window. Below, a group of elderly protesters had gathered, some in veteran caps, holding signs reading "Stand with Harrison" and "Banks serve people, not profit." "We need to address them," Marcus said. "They're not just supporting us, they're finding their own voice." James straightened his blazer, touching his medal once more. "Together then." As they headed for the elevator, Sarah handed them the latest social media statistics. The security footage of James being mocked had been viewed 20 million times, but it was the comments that told the real story, people sharing their own experiences, their own battles against institutional arrogance. "The world's changing, Dad," Marcus said as they descended. "What you started here, it's becoming something bigger than just one bank." James nodded, understanding. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from the battle itself, but from inspiring others to stand their ground. As the elevator doors opened to the lobby full of cameras and supporters, he stood tall, ready to tell their story, not for himself, but for every person who had ever been dismissed, deceived, or denied. Their dignity by those who valued profit over principle. The bank's records room hummed with activity as forensic accountants and federal investigators combed through decades of transactions. What had begun as an ownership dispute had transformed into one of the largest banking investigations in recent history. "We've found another pattern," announced Chen, the lead forensic accountant, pointing to her screen. "They didn't just target the elderly. Look at these foreclosures, all military families, all while the service member was deployed." James, who had been quietly observing from a corner, stepped forward. His face hardened as he reviewed the data. Each entry represented a family losing their home while their loved ones served overseas. "Cross-reference these with Sterling's private investment portfolio," Marcus instructed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I'm willing to bet we'll find those properties in his real estate holdings." A young investigator raised his hand. "Sir, we've found something in the electronic archives, emails about what they called Operation Clean Sweep." The emails appeared on the main display screen. They detailed a systematic plan to force out small business loan holders in developing neighborhoods, clearing the way for luxury developments. The language was clinical, detached, as if they were discussing inventory rather than people's livelihoods. "Got the property records," another analyst called out. "Every foreclosed business was replaced by a high-end development. The construction contracts all went to companies owned by board members' families." Marcus had prepared for corruption, but the scope of it still stunned him. They turned a community bank into a personal empire-building machine. The evidence mounted hour by hour, predatory loans disguised as financial assistance, inflated, fees hidden in complex contract language, community development funds diverted through a maze of shell companies. Each discovery painted a picture of calculated exploitation. "Here's something interesting," Rodriguez, the interim legal counsel, called from her station. "They kept two sets of risk assessment criteria, one for their preferred clients, another for what they called demographic risks." James moved to look at the documents. Demographic risks? Code for elderly, minorities and military families, Rodriguez explained. They created impossible qualification standards, then pushed these groups toward high-risk, high-fee products. The investigation had drawn in additional federal agencies. FBI analysts worked alongside banking regulators, building criminal cases against each board member. The evidence wasn't just damaging, it was overwhelming. A tech specialist called Marcus over to his workstation. "Mr. Harrison, we've recovered Sterling's deleted emails." He knew about the military foreclosures. In fact, he specifically targeted bases where deployments were scheduled. Marcus's hands gripped the back of the analyst's chair. "Send everything related to military families to the JAG office. They'll want to pursue their own charges." The afternoon wore on. James watched the systematic dismantling of decades of corruption, each revelation confirming what he had suspected but could never prove. His quiet persistence in maintaining records, in filing complaints, in refusing to be silenced, it had all laid the groundwork for this moment. "Mr. Harrison," Chen approached with a tablet, "we found something you should see. It's about your neighbor, Margaret Wilson." The documents showed a deliberate strategy to force Margaret into foreclosure. Sterling had personally intervened to deny loan modifications that would have saved her home. The reason? Her property was key to a planned luxury development. "The development never happened," Chen continued. "They just wanted to break up the old neighborhood. Too many long-term residents asking questions about the bank's changes." James remembered Margaret's funeral 6 months ago. She died in a small apartment, still believing she'd somehow failed to manage her finances properly. The truth was, she'd never had a chance. Add her case to the criminal complaints. Marcus instructed, "and find out who else was targeted. In that neighborhood, we're going to make this right." As evening approached, the investigators had filled multiple servers with evidence. The corruption wasn't just extensive, it was meticulous, documented in spreadsheets and emails that revealed a culture of casual cruelty. "They never thought anyone would see this," Rodriguez observed, reviewing another batch of damaging emails. "They were so confident in their position, they didn't even try to hide their actions." James stood by the window, watching the sun set over the city. In his reflection, he saw not just himself, but his father's legacy and his son's vindication. The bank would survive this investigation, but it would emerge transformed, restored to its original mission of serving the community. "Dad," Marcus called softly, "the FBI wants to brief us on the criminal charges they're preparing. You should hear this." Together they headed to the conference room, where justice, long delayed but not denied, was finally taking shape in indictments and evidence files. The quiet soldier and his silent billionaire son had unleashed a reckoning that would reshape not just one bank, but the entire banking industry's understanding of accountability. The plaza outside First Metropolitan Bank had transformed into a gathering place for the community. Veterans in service caps stood shoulder to shoulder with small business owners and elderly residents, all sharing stories of their experiences with the bank. Hand-drawn signs bobbed above the crowd. "Harrison stands for us and community over corruption." Tom Miller, owner of Miller's Hardware, a family business that had survived 3 generations, took the makeshift podium. 30 years ago, when my father needed a loan to expand the store, William Harrison himself approved it. He said small businesses were the backbone of this community. Then Sterling's board came in, tried to force us out with rate hikes and hidden fees. But James Harrison fought for us every step of the way. The crowd murmured in agreement. More people stepped forward to share their stories. Sarah Chen, daughter of local restaurant owners, spoke about how James had helped her parents understand predatory loan terms they'd nearly signed. Michael O'Brien, a retired firefighter, described how the bank had tried to foreclose on his home while he was recovering from an injury. Inside the bank, James and Marcus watched the gathering from Marcus's office. A petition was circulating through the crowd, already bearing thousands of signatures, calling for a complete return to community-focused banking. "Your grandfather would be proud," James said, touching the old pocket watch in his blazer. "The community remembers. They remember what banking used to mean." Katie Rodriguez, a former bank employee who'd been fired for questioning unethical practices, had organized a group of whistleblowers. They'd set up a help desk in the plaza, assisting people in documenting their experiences with the bank. Each story added another piece to the puzzle of corruption. "Mr. Harrison," Sarah entered. With a tablet, the local business association just released a statement. They're calling for all their members to return to First Metropolitan once the new management is in place. They're citing your father's legacy of community partnership. The support wasn't just local. Veterans groups across the country had taken up the cause, sharing their own stories of banking discrimination. Harrison Heroes had evolved into a movement for financial accountability. Reverend Jackson from the old neighborhood church approached the podium. "When the storm hit last year and half our roof caved in, the bank denied our loan application, said we weren't a viable investment. James Harrison wrote letters, filed complaints, tried to help us save our community center. Today we learn his son built an empire just to make things right. That's what legacy means, folks. That's what community means." A group of elderly residents had set up chairs near the entrance, holding an impromptu vigil. Many wore their Sunday best, sitting with quiet dignity as reporters gathered their stories. They remembered William Harrison, remembered when banking was personal, when your word and your character mattered more than credit scores. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message. "The Small Business Alliance is organizing a Welcome Back to Banking fair," he told his father. "They want to help people who were driven away by Sterling's policies return to the bank." James nodded, watching. Another group arrive in the plaza. Young families, holding children's hands, carrying signs about saving homes and protecting dreams. The crowd now spanned generations, each with their own reason to stand with the Harrisons. "Sir," Sarah interrupted gently, "Mrs. Wilson's daughter is here, the one who lost her home." James turned from the window. Margaret Wilson's daughter stood in the doorway, clutching a familiar-looking photo album. "Mom kept everything," she said, tears in her eyes. "Every letter you wrote trying to help her, every complaint you filed. She never lost faith in you, Mr. Harrison." The album contained years of correspondence, James's increasingly urgent letters to the board, his detailed documentation of the bank's predatory practices. Margaret had preserved it all, even as she lost her home. Outside, the crowd had begun singing, an impromptu rendition of "God Bless America." The sound carried through the bank's halls, a reminder that this wasn't just about finance, it was about community, about standing together against those who would exploit the vulnerable. James Harrison straightened his blazer, touched his medal one last time, and headed for the plaza. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed that banking should serve people, not profit from them. The community had found its voice, and it was speaking with the quiet power of truth, long denied but finally heard. The executive conference room had taken on the atmosphere of a courtroom. On one side sat the remaining board members with their attorneys, their earlier arrogance replaced by grim resignation. Across the table, Marcus and James Harrison faced them, flanked by federal regulators and the bank's new legal team. Sterling, his designer suit now wrinkled from hours of questioning, leaned forward. "Be reasonable, Marcus. We can reach an accommodation that benefits everyone." "Reasonable?" Marcus's voice was quiet but sharp. "Like you were reasonable with Mrs. Wilson? Or with the military families you foreclosed on?" The settlement document lay on the table between them, its terms stark and non-negotiable. Complete resignation of the board, full cooperation with federal investigators, surrender of all assets gained through fraudulent activities. "This is corporate suicide," protested Janet Chen, one of Sterling's closest allies. "You'll destroy shareholder value." James, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Shareholder value? My father believed the true value of a bank was measured in the dreams it helped build, not the profits it squeezed from people's misfortunes." The federal regulators nodded in agreement. The evidence collected over the past day had painted a damning picture of systematic exploitation. "The terms are simple," Marcus continued. "Resign, cooperate, make restitution. In return, we don't push for maximum criminal penalties." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And believe me, what we've found justifies maximum penalties." Sterling's lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he waved it away. "You can't expect us to just walk away from everything we've built." "Everything you've stolen," Marcus corrected. He opened a folder and began laying out photographs. "This is the Cooper family, 3 generations of farmers. Your predatory loan terms cost them their land." Another photo. "The Veterans Support Center, denied funding because they wouldn't sell their property to your development company." More photos followed, each one a face of the bank's victims. James watched the board members' reactions. Some couldn't meet his eyes. Others stared at the photos with dawning horror, perhaps truly seeing the human cost of their actions for the first time. "You have 1 hour," Marcus stated. "Sign the settlement, or we go public with everything. Every email, every memo, every recorded conversation where you laughed about senile seniors and desperate vets." The younger board members broke first. 2 of them reached for the settlement papers, already calculating how to salvage their careers from the wreckage. The others watched, a domino effect of surrender beginning. Sterling made one last attempt. "The other banks won't stand for this. They'll close ranks against you." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You still don't understand what I've built, do you? First Metropolitan is just the beginning. My holding companies have significant positions in 12 other major banks. Would you like to guess which ones? The color drained from Sterling's face as he finally grasped the full scope of Marcus's strategy. This wasn't just about one bank. It was about reshaping the entire industry. The settlement papers include a clause, Marcus continued, requiring you to testify about similar practices at other institutions. Your knowledge will be valuable. One by one, the board members began to sign. Their signatures were shaky, but the pen strokes were final. Decades of power and privilege dissolved in moments of surrender. James stood by the window, watching the community gathering in the plaza below. "You know what the worst part is?" he asked, not turning around. "None of this was necessary. The bank was profitable under my father's principles. All this corruption, all this pain, it was just greed, simple greed." The last signature was added to the settlement. Sterling dropped the pen like it burned his fingers. "What happens now?" "Now?" Marcus gathered the signed documents. "Now we rebuild. Not just the bank, but trust, community, everything you tried to destroy." He turned to the federal regulators. "They're all yours. I suggest starting with the military family foreclosures. The JAG office is particularly interested in those." As the regulators led the former board members out, James and Marcus shared a look of quiet triumph. The battle was won, but the real work was just beginning. "Dad," Marcus said softly, "ready to help me restore grandfather's legacy?" James straightened, his blazer, his medal catching the light. "Together, son, the way banking should be." Below, the crowd in the plaza had begun to sing again. The sound of their voices carried up to the conference room, a hymn of justice served and community restored. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a fitting backdrop for what the media was already calling the Harrison Restoration. The bank's main hall had been transformed for the formal announcement of the leadership change. Cameras lined the back wall while community members filled the rows of chairs. James and Marcus stood on the podium, watching as federal marshals escorted Sterling and the former board members through a side entrance. The once powerful executives now moved like deflated versions of themselves, their expensive suits unable to mask their defeat. "Today marks a new chapter in the history of First Metropolitan Bank," Marcus began, his voice carrying through the hushed hall. "But before we look forward, we must acknowledge the past." He gestured to a screen where documentation of the board's crimes began to play. Bank statements, emails, foreclosure notices. Each piece of evidence told part of the story of corruption. "The federal investigation has revealed systematic exploitation spanning 15 years, Marcus continued. Predatory lending practices targeting the elderly, deliberate foreclosures on military families, misappropriation of community development funds." Sterling shifted uncomfortably as his own emails appeared on screen, his casual dismissal of disposable clients drawing gasps from the audience. "But justice isn't just about punishment," Marcus said, turning to his father. "It's about restoration." "Dad?" James stepped forward, his service blazer immaculate, his bearing straight and proud. "My father founded this bank on a simple principle. A bank exists to serve its community. Today, we return to that mission." The new board resolution appeared on screen. It laid out sweeping changes: the establishment of a community oversight committee, mandatory ethics reviews, restoration of foreclosed properties, and compensation for victims of predatory practices. "Every wrongful foreclosure will be reviewed," James announced. "Every predatory loan restructured, every community development project restored." He paused, looking directly at Sterling. "Banking isn't about playing with numbers on a screen. It's about people, lives, dreams." The federal prosecutor stepped forward next, her face stern. "Based on the evidence provided by the Harrison investigation, we are announcing multiple federal indictments. The charges include fraud, racketeering, and violation of banking regulations." Sterling's lawyer tried to guide him toward the exit, but Marcus wasn't finished. Mr. Sterling, before you leave, there's someone who'd like to speak. Margaret Wilson's daughter rose from the front row, clutching her mother's photo album. My mother died believing she had failed, she said, her voice trembling but clear. That she somehow deserved to lose her home. Today, I learn that you personally ordered the rejection of her loan modification, that you laughed about it in emails. Sterling couldn't meet her eyes. The album's pages fluttered as she opened it, showing years of careful financial records, of letters begging for help, of James Harrison's attempts to intervene. The Wilson family will be the first to receive restitution, Marcus announced. Their home will be restored, with full compensation. For their losses, a cheer went up from the crowd. Other victims began to stand, each one a testament to the human cost of corporate greed. Veterans in their service caps, elderly couples holding hands, small business owners who had fought to survive. Effective immediately, Marcus continued. First Metropolitan Bank returns to its founding principles. The Harrison Family Trust will maintain oversight to ensure this mission is never again corrupted. The federal marshals stepped forward to escort the former board members out. As they passed James, Sterling paused. You planned this for years, he said, a mix of admiration and bitterness in his voice. The quiet veteran routine, your silent, billionaire son. You played us perfectly. James straightened his medal. No, Sterling, we didn't play you. We just believed in something you forgot exists. Integrity. As the former executives were led away, Marcus unveiled the new bank charter. It combined the original 1929 community service requirements with modern, ethical banking practices. William Harrison's words once again took prominence. Service, trust, community. The work of restoration begins today, Marcus announced. But this isn't just about First Metropolitan. This is a call for change across the banking industry, a return to banking that serves people, not profits. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. James stood tall beside his son, his father's pocket watch ticking steadily in his blazer. 3 generations of Harrison values had prevailed. Patience, principle, and unwavering devotion to what's right. Outside, the morning sun caught the bank's carved stone facade, highlighting words that were no longer just decoration, but a renewed promise. Founded in trust, built on service, committed to community. Justice had been served, not with violence or vengeance, but with the quiet power of truth and the strength of a community united in purpose. 1 month after the board's removal, First Metropolitan Bank hummed with renewed purpose. The marble lobby had been restored to its original design, with William Harrison's portrait returned to its place of honor. But the real changes ran much deeper than aesthetics. James sat in what had once been Sterling's office, now transformed into a community consultation room. The expensive modern furniture had been replaced with comfortable chairs that welcomed rather than intimidated. On Ishani, the wall hung the new bank charter, its golden frame catching the morning light. Mr. Harrison? A young loan officer appeared at the door. The Martinez family is here about their restaurant loan. The Martinez family had been denied expansion funding 3 times under Sterling's leadership. Now they sat across from James, spreading out their business plans on the table. My father would have loved this, James said, examining their proposal. He always said family restaurants were the heart of a community. He looked up with a warm smile. Let's make this work. Down the hall, Marcus was implementing broader changes. The Harrison Family Trust had established new operating principles that were revolutionizing how the bank functioned. Every loan officer now underwent community service training. Every financial product was reviewed for ethical impact before approval. The Community Oversight Committee has signed off on the new lending guidelines, Sarah reported, tablet in hand. They're particularly impressed with the veteran support programs. Marcus nodded, studying the latest implementation reports. The bank had already begun the process of reviewing every foreclosure from the Sterling era. Families were being contacted, loans restructured, homes restored. "How's the small business initiative going?" he asked. 28 loans approved this week, Sarah replied, all to local businesses that Sterling's board had rejected. The Community Development Fund is fully operational again. The transformation wasn't just internal. First Metropolitan had become a model for ethical banking, attracting attention from financial institutions across the country. Other banks were beginning to adopt similar community-focused policies, fearing they might have their own Marcus Harrison quietly watching. In the training room, James was addressing a group of new employees. "Banking isn't just about numbers," he explained, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "It's about understanding people's dreams and helping them build a future." Trainees, many hired from the local community, listened intently. Among them were children of families who had once been victims of Sterling's policies. Now they were part of the solution, ensuring the bank would never again stray from its mission. Marcus joined his father for lunch in the small park across from the bank. Food trucks lined the street, many owned by recipients of the bank's new small business loans. "Remember when this park was going to be turned into a luxury condo development?" James asked, watching children play on the newly restored playground. Marcus nodded. "Sterling's pet project. Now it's staying green space dedicated to Mom." The Margaret Harrison Memorial Park would officially open next month, a symbol of the bank's renewed commitment to community space over profit maximization. Inside the bank's archive room, a team was carefully preserving records from both the dark days and the resurrection. Future bankers would study this period, learning how corruption could take root and how it was ultimately defeated by patience, principle, and the power of family legacy. "Dad," Marcus called from the doorway, "the Wilson family is here. We're ready to hand over their house keys." James straightened his blazer and followed his son to the main hall. Margaret Wilson's daughter stood with her own children, tears in her eyes as Marcus presented the keys to their family home. "Your mother's garden is still there," James told her softly. "I've been keeping an eye on it." The Harrison Family Trust had established a principle that would guide the bank for generations. Profit was acceptable, but not at the expense of people. Every decision had to balance financial sustainability with community benefit. As afternoon sun filled the bank's halls, James and Marcus reviewed plans for the future. A scholarship program for local students, a retirement planning service that protected seniors instead of exploiting them, small business incubators in historically underserved neighborhoods. "Grandfather would be proud," Marcus said, looking at William Harrison's portrait. "We're not just running a bank, we're building his vision of community service." James touched his father's old pocket watch, its steady ticking a reminder of values passed down through generations. Banking should be about building bridges, not walls, about lifting people up, not pushing them down. Outside, the community continued to rebuild, strengthened by a bank that once again served its needs. The Harrison legacy had not just survived, it had evolved, adapting old values to modern times while never losing sight of its core mission. First Metropolitan stood as proof that integrity could triumph over greed, that patience could overcome corruption, and that true wealth lay not in profits, but in the trust of a community served with honor. 6 months after the Harrison restoration, the impact of their victory had spread far beyond First Metropolitan's walls. Letters and emails poured in daily from across the country, thousands of people sharing their own stories of banking injustice and finding hope in the Harrison example. "Another bank CEO resigned this morning," Marcus said, showing his father the news on his tablet. "Their board discovered we had a 15% ownership stake through subsidiary companies. They're implementing our community banking guidelines voluntarily." James smiled, sorting through the morning's thank you letters. Each one represented a life touched, a wrong righted, a community strengthened. The most recent was from a veteran, In Oregon, whose local bank had suddenly discovered a way to save his farm after decades of threatening foreclosure. "They're calling it the Harrison effect," Sarah reported, bringing in the daily summary. "Banks across the country are reviewing their lending practices, especially concerning elderly and military clients. No one wants to be the next Sterling." The former board member's legal proceedings had become a cautionary tale in banking circles. Sterling himself had agreed to testify against other corrupt banking executives in exchange for a lighter sentence. His testimony was sending shockwaves through the financial industry. "Look at this," Marcus pointed to another report. 3 major banks have established community oversight committees. They're using our charter as a template. The First Metropolitan model was becoming a blueprint for ethical banking. Financial journals had replaced their usual profit-focused analysis with articles about community impact and sustainable growth. Business schools were developing case studies about the Harrison restoration. A knock at the door interrupted them. Rodriguez, now the bank's permanent legal counsel, entered with a stack of documents. "The last of the predatory loans have been restructured," she announced. "Every victim of Sterling's policies has been contacted and offered restitution. But the true measure of success could be seen in the small moments, like Mrs. Chen from the local restaurant getting approval for her expansion loan, or the Veterans Center securing funding for their new building, or the community garden flourishing where Sterling had planned to build luxury condos. James walked the bank's halls, now filled with photos documenting its history, including the dark years and the restoration. "We need to remember both," he'd insisted, "the good and the bad. That's how we prevent history from repeating." The Harrison Family Trust had established a watchdog division, staffed by financial experts and community advocates. Their mission was to identify and prevent predatory banking practices before they could take root. Other banks were creating similar oversight departments, recognizing that ethical banking was not just morally right, but financially sustainable. "Dad," Marcus called from his office, "the military families are here." In the community room, dozens of service members and their families had gathered. Many had lost homes during Sterling's reign. Now they were receiving keys to new houses or compensation for their losses. But more importantly, they were receiving an apology, a recognition of the wrong done to them while they served their country. The Harrison Foundation's veteran housing program is ready to launch nationally, Sarah added. 10 banks have already signed on as partners. The foundation, funded by Marcus's billions and guided by James's principles, was extending the reach of their reforms. It wasn't just about fixing past wrongs. It was about creating a new standard for the future of banking. Letters continued to arrive from former First Metropolitan employees who had been fired for questioning Sterling's practices. Many were being rehired, their ethical stands finally vindicated. Others had become advisors, helping other banks implement reforms. "The community credit rating system is showing remarkable results," Rodriguez reported. "By considering local factors and personal history instead of just numbers, we're seeing higher repayment rates than under Sterling's rigorous standards." James nodded, unsurprised. His father had understood this. Character and community connections were often better predictors of reliability than cold financial data. As evening approached, father and son stood at the window, watching people come and go from the bank. There was a different energy now, a sense of trust restored. Children played in the park across the street, their parents chatting on benches that had replaced Sterling's planned parking structure. "You know what makes me proudest," James said quietly. "Not the reforms or the justice served. It's seeing people walk into their bank without fear." "That's what banking should be." Marcus smiled, understanding completely. They had done more than restore a single bank. They had reminded the entire industry of its true purpose. The Harrison legacy would live on, not just in their family, but in every bank that chose service over greed, community over profit, and principle over power. 1 year to the day after James Harrison walked into First Metropolitan Bank in his service blazer, the community gathered again. This time they came not in protest, but in celebration. The bank's centennial celebration coincided with the unveiling of a bronze plaque commemorating the Harrison restoration. James stood before the crowd, his medal catching the morning sun. Age had not bent his military bearing, and recent events had added a quiet satisfaction to his dignified presence. Marcus stood beside him, their matching navy suits a conscious echo of James's old service blazer. "A year ago," James began, "I walked into this bank with nothing but a leather portfolio and faith in what's right." He touched the worn portfolio, now preserved in a display case alongside other artifacts of their struggle. "I didn't know then that my son had spent 20 years building the power to help me. I just knew that some things are worth fighting for." The crowd included faces familiar from that first confrontation, veterans who had stood with him, community members who had shared their stories, bank employees who had risked their careers to expose truth. But there were new faces too, drawn by the example First Metropolitan had set. "Banking isn't about marble halls or profit margins," James continued. "It's about trust, about standing beside your neighbors when they dream big or hit hard times. My father understood that in 1929, and it's still true today." Marcus stepped forward to unveil the plaque. Its bronze surface caught the light, the words clear and bold: "The Harrison Legacy, 3 generations of service, trust, and community, dedicated to William Harrison, founder, James Harrison, protector, and Marcus Harrison, restorer." Below, these words was William Harrison's original motto, now restored to its rightful place. "A bank's true wealth lies not in its vaults, but in the dreams it helps build." The ceremony continued with community testimonials. Mrs. Chen spoke about her restaurant's successful expansion. Veterans described how the bank's new programs had helped their families thrive. Young entrepreneurs shared stories of businesses launched with First Metropolitan support. But the most moving moment came when Margaret Wilson's daughter led a group of elderly residents in unveiling the Margaret Harrison Memorial Garden. Created where Sterling had once planned a parking structure, the garden would provide fresh produce for local food banks, another example of the bank's renewed community mission. James touched his father's pocket watch, its familiar weight a reminder of values passed down through generations. The watch would soon have a place of honor in the bank's historical display, but today it still rode in his pocket, ticking steadily like the heartbeat of a legacy preserved. "The Harrison story isn't over," Marcus addressed the crowd. "It's being written every day, in every loan that helps a family, every business we help grow, every community project we support." He turned to his father. "Dad taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives you touch and the good you do." The gathering evolved into a community celebration. Food trucks, many financed by First Metropolitans, small business program, lined the streets. Children played in the park while their parents shared stories of renewal and restoration. The bank's doors stood open, welcoming rather than intimidating. Inside his office, James watched the festivities with quiet satisfaction. The walls now held photos of 3 generations of Harrisons, but also of the community they served. Faces and stories that gave meaning to their work. "Dad?" Marcus joined him at the window. "The regulators just called. 3 more major banks are adopting our ethical banking guidelines. The Harrison effect continues." James nodded, understanding that their victory had grown beyond one bank, beyond one family. They had reminded the financial world of its original purpose, not to extract wealth, but to help create it, not to exploit communities, but to strengthen them. "Your grandfather once told me," James said, "that a bank is just a building. It's people who give it a soul." Outside, the celebration continued as the sun rose higher, illuminating the bank's carved facade. The words, service, trust, community, no longer seemed like relics of a bygone era. They were a promise renewed, a legacy restored, a future secured by the quiet power of principle prevailing over greed. The Harrison family had done more than save a bank. They had proved that patience, integrity, and devotion to what's right could still triumph in the modern world, and that was a legacy worth more than all the money in First Metropolitan's vaults.